We've got big news in the fight to restore election integrity in California. We're launching a campaign to amend the state constitution to require voter ID be used in all future state and local elections. This is a real game changer. We recently held a briefing for our supporters on what our ballot measure would require, the voter ID initiative, and how you can help make this big reform a reality. So watch this briefing and then join the fight at the website electionintegrityinitiative.com. electionintegrityinitiative.com. Now let's get on to the briefing. I'm Carl DeMaio, Chairman of Reform California, and welcome to this special presentation on a state constitutional amendment that we're proposing in California to require the use of voter ID in all future state and local elections. This initiative is of paramount importance because we have a cancer growing on our democracy. We cannot have a healthy democracy when we have a supermajority of voters, more than 60%, who have concerns about voter fraud. And that is according to the latest polling, which we'll discuss in a moment. Democrats, independents, and Republicans all harboring concerns about voter fraud. And so this is not a partisan issue. This should be a bipartisan issue of a commitment to restoring public trust and confidence in the manner in which our elections are conducted. And so I invite you to check out the website, electionintegrityinitiative.com, electionintegrityinitiative.com, where we will post this presentation as well as have additional news on the fight to restore election integrity in California, as well as the full text of the ballot measure we're going to discuss today in this briefing. Let's start out first with defining the problem. Next slide. We know in this country that there has been a raging debate about election integrity and the lack thereof. And let me just start out by saying that in 2016, there is ample footage, ample examples, clips, audio, video of Democrat politicians, Democrat campaign activists, all claiming that the election was fraudulent, that it was stolen, that there were shenanigans. You can go back to 2004 and have similar claims by Democrat operatives, Democrat politicians, that the 2004 election had problems. 2000, the Al Gore, George W. Bush hanging Chad controversy. And so Democrats have raised problems with election integrity in a number of election cycles. And of course, President Trump in the 2020 election raised concerns. But when you look at how our elections are conducted, you can actually use a nonpartisan set of criteria in evaluating whether an election has integrity or not. The Transparency Foundation did a deep dive, an independent analysis and audit of the 2022 California election, and it laid out 10 criteria. I really encourage you to check out that report, and you'll understand why election integrity is such a problem in California. Their report is online at electionintegrityca.com, electionintegrityca.com. But the Transparency Foundation report walks through 10 criteria and fails California on 9 out of 10 of the criteria for an election integrity. And it's not just theory, it's not just rhetoric. If you look at the report, you'll find receipts. You'll find actual documented problems with how California's elections are set up, ranging from improper maintenance of their voter lists, not doing citizenship eligibility checks properly, not verifying and removing people who move out of the state of California. You also see problems with disparities, great disparities in signature reviews, because the Secretary of State's signature review criteria is very weak and inconsistent, to even actual documented evidence of voter fraud in ballots that were rejected because of mismatched signatures, where the voter was contacted after the election And the voter said, I didn't vote. I no longer live in California. I don't know who submitted my ballot, but it wasn't me. 14%, by the way, documented voter fraud rate in this report. And so I really encourage you, if you have an open mind, if you are looking for data and evidence, check out electionintegrityca.com. Any reasonable voter, any reasonable individual will conclude that California's voting system is, to quote the Transparency Foundation, quote, the worst election practices in the nation. Now, let me go into a little further detail on that report. Next slide, please. That audit of ballots that were sent out, and this is part of the problem that we have to deal with in California, is that California politicians have created an intentionally fraud-prone process for elections. Step one is don't maintain your voter list. And so when people move out of the state, we have documented in this report that the election offices are not updating their voter registration lists. And so in every election, we have documented a massive percentage, 10%, according to one survey, of erroneous or orphan ballots. This is a ballot that's sent to an address where the voter no longer resides there, or perhaps has never resided there. So orphan ballots are out there being mailed out to people because people are still on the voter list and the voter list is not properly maintained. The second part of the fraud-oriented approach to elections in California is that California politicians use COVID-19 as the excuse to do all mail-in elections. Well, COVID-19 is gone, but you bet we're still doing all mail-in elections. Now, they say it's more convenient, but really what they're after is the ability to get orphan ballots mailed out to people who no longer reside at an address or a residence. The third step is to not do proper signature checks on ballots. Actually, the third step is ballot harvesting, allowing people to go out who have no relationship to the voter and knock on doors and harvest ballots. The fourth step is no proper signature checks. And you'll see in the report the massive disparity in signature rejection rates across the state of California, indicating clearly that some counties are doing a good job of signature reviews. Other counties are doing a pretty non-existent job of signature reviews. So this final piece of data, though, is quite alarming. And that's where the Transparency Foundation asked for 9 counties to provide lists of voters whose ballots were rejected because of a mismatched signature. And again, let's establish that the report already shows that signature reviews are not being done properly, that a lot of bad signatures are being accepted when they shouldn't be. But of the signatures that were so bad that they were rejected, a number of voters actually cured their ballot. About 50% of voters cured their ballot statewide, which is fine. That's great. It means the voter said, no, my signature changed. I forgot how I signed years ago when I got registered. That's normal. There's nothing suspicious there. But of the 50% of people who did not confirm that they voted, and we didn't hear back from them, the Transparency Foundation aggressively went out to go interview those people, to try to track them down and find them. And most of those people they couldn't find. Whether they still exist, we don't know. Whether they live in California, we don't know. Whether they voted, we certainly don't know. But of the people they actually talked to, of that sample size, which is a statistically very relevant sample size of 388, 81.7% said, yeah, I voted, but I didn't know that my ballot was rejected, or I was too busy to verify my vote. But an alarming 14.17% said that they did not vote, and 4.12% were unsure. Again, we were looking at this data, and it would indicate that 14.17% of people was probably the low end of the potential fraud rate for these rejected ballots. This is a problem. Now, you can say that the problem is a big one or a small one or somewhere in between. But if we can reduce the level of problems in our elections, why not do that? Why not have the most accurate election the election with the most integrity. Who can be against that? Well, apparently there's a lot of people against it. They happen to be the politicians and most of the media outlets in California. But the first thing we need to understand is that when we document problems like this, weaknesses, errors, fraud rates, signature mismatch, we need to do our level best to improve the process. The first thing that we have to talk about is how do we improve the process? And I don't think that there's any doubt that the process can be improved. But the second issue needs to be, what would restore public trust and confidence? Because my biggest challenge, my biggest concern is when you have so many Americans from both political parties who don't trust the outcome of an election. And then they look at specific examples like I just gave right now, and then they say, well, obviously the damage was done to my candidate. We cannot have voters questioning the outcome of an election. We need public trust and confidence. And that must guide our every reform. It's not just fixing the problems, but also giving the public a confidence level that they deserve to want to participate in the process and believe in the outcomes. So that's important for us to understand. And that leads us to our ballot measure discussion today. Next slide. So the problems that we just mentioned, I just want to make sure we go through the litany of them. There's a lack of verification on people's eligibility because of motor voter. It's now the honor system. We really don't have internal controls by the Secretary of State and individual counties to verify eligibility of citizenship on registrations. And just as last Friday, a California Superior Court, appellate court, ruled that illegal immigrants are actually able to vote in school board elections, which again is a complete monstrosity of a decision. But lack of eligibility to vote is a major concern. Second is those outdated voter registration lists. 2 million people fled California between 2019 and 2022. We have ample examples of people leaving the state as far back as 2008, 2010, 2012, and still remaining on the voter rolls. This is where you'll get a lawsuit like the Judicial Watch lawsuit against County of LA, where they proved that LA County had more people on their voter registration rolls than they actually had people residing in the county. And the answer from the county was, well, we didn't maintain our list. We'll do a better job. So voter list maintenance is a requirement in federal law, the National Voter Registration Act, as well as the Help America Vote Act. It is a mandate of the federal government to states to do a de minimis amount of activity to maintain their voter rolls. And California is not even meeting that federal standard. Third, as I mentioned, the orphan ballots go out based on outdated voter lists. And we also have ballot harvesting, which means no chain of custody on ballots. Next slide. We do know that those ballot harvesting groups are primarily funded on the far left of the political spectrum. And we know that there are very inappropriate practices being used by ballot harvesting organizations, that even some of the ballot harvesting is funded by your taxpayer money. Gavin Newsom and local elected officials have been using grants and contracts to fund ballot harvesting through left-wing groups, documented millions of dollars. And this is a problem when you have political groups on one side of the aisle get funding and resources to harvest ballots. What practices are they using? Are they doing it right? Are they complying with the law? Again, the failure to check signatures. Each county should be doing this, but the Secretary of State's regulation starts with the presumption that a signature is valid on its face. And they even have machines that are looking at the signatures rather than human beings. And you can literally see machines being set to different sensitivities across the state of California, which raises obviously an equal protection question. Why is one signature review used in one county, but another more stringent review process used in another county? So there is a problem with the signature reviews in California. And then post-election audits are at best risk-limiting audits. and they only address a handful of issues. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about polling, because public trust and confidence in elections is a real driver of what we're trying to do here. The Berkeley poll, which is only of California residents, so this is not a national poll, it is California only, asked a question: how big of a threat do you think people voting or casting ballots illegally in elections are? And this was November 2022, so this is the most recent election integrity poll done by UC Berkeley. 39% of voters say that it is a major threat to them that people are voting or casting ballots illegally in elections, which means that they think it's a big problem. They think that it's likely happening. It is a threat. A minor threat probably happens, don't know. It could have an impact, but it's minor, 21%. Add the two of those numbers up, it's 60%. And so I say shame on the media in the state of California and Democrat politicians for trying to suggest that somehow election integrity is only the issue of the Republicans, or somehow it's a partisan issue. Now, this is a bipartisan issue. It is a supermajority issue. 25% of Democrats say it's a major threat. 45% of Democrats say minor or major threat. 90% of Republicans. 59% of independents. Anyone not talking about election integrity and ways to improve the process is out of step with California. Not a threat. Well, you see the numbers there, but you cannot have a healthy democracy when even one political party disproportionately has a challenge or a problem with election integrity. Next slide is on the issue of accessibility. The same poll. How big of a threat do you consider organized efforts making it harder for Americans to vote in elections? A total of 78% say it's a minor or major threat, that somehow people would make things harder to vote in elections. More than the 60% of voter fraud, but still, these are two important issues that we have to tether ourselves to. We can't just reduce voter fraud at the expense of making it harder to vote in elections. We need to satisfy these concerns as a both and, not an either or. And I believe voter ID can achieve that. But this is something that I want you to understand, is that we don't want to make it harder for people to vote in elections. And that has guided every element of this ballot initiative in terms of our drafting as well as our messaging. Next slide. Voter ID is actually quite popular. A Rasmussen poll in March of 2021 showed that voter ID support has only increased since 2018. 67% of voters across the country say you should have to show photo identification, such as a driver's license, in order to be allowed to vote. That includes 89% of Republicans, 60% of Democrats, and 77% of independents. By the way, I encourage you to grab that poll with the website below. Look at the ethnic crosstabs. You'll find that a majority of Latinos, a majority of African Americans support voter ID. So the idea that somehow voter ID is anti one group or another group is provably false. And the only people you need to ask are the voters themselves. By the way, the U.S. Supreme Court has also consistently ruled that voter ID does not infringe upon voter rights. It does not discriminate. It does not suppress votes. That is the case law of the United States of America in repeated court cases by the Supreme Court. And we have more than 30 states that use some form of identification in the voting process. And many of them have a strict voter ID law. More than 24 states have a strict voter ID law. So this is actually a pretty common practice in other states for elections. Next slide. So the issues that we struggled with when we drafted this initiative: how do we fix the problems and restore election integrity? And we felt that there are a lot of problems, clearly. In the Transparency Foundation report, if you read it, it really goes into a whole bunch of problems. But we felt we had to prioritize the problems that were of the most concern to the public and could present the biggest challenge for potential voter fraud. We also, secondly, must comply with federal law. The Help America Vote Act and the National Voter Registration Act impose specific legal requirements at the federal level that we must comply with and accommodate. Our initiative is fully grounded not only in U.S. Supreme Court case law, but also the strict, clear requirements of both HAVA and NVRA. Third, where is the public? What do they want to see happen? And fourth, what are we able to do as a grassroots campaign? Do we have the volunteer and financial resources to wage the battle? So this is the initiative that we would present to you for your consideration and support. Next slide. Our voter ID election integrity initiative of 2024 has three major themes. Number one, it holds state and local officials accountable for accurate voter list maintenance. In fact, the automatic mailing of ballots will be suspended for any voter individually where there's doubt about their residency. Second, it requires voter ID, both for in-person balloting as well as for mail-in balloting. And third, it requires that we do everything to measure and reduce wait times so that people at polling locations do not have an undue burden to cast their ballot. We saw with the consolidation of polling locations into polling centers in several counties, for example, in San Diego, there was an 80% reduction in polling locations in the 2022 election, and the media did not want to cover this. But the reality is conservative older voters vote on election day. It's a habit of theirs, but they had their votes suppressed. You want to talk about voter suppression? Take a look at what California did in those counties, particularly San Diego County on election day. And by the way, it rained in 2022, November 2022. So you had long lines in the rain, and the liberal politicians of California knew that conservative older voters wanted to vote in person on election day, and they laughed the whole time as the media covered it up for them about the long lines. They said there was nothing wrong. Well, there was a lot wrong with that election. Our initiative would end that game, that scam, that voter suppression. Whether it happens to an older conservative voter or an African American, any attempt to make it harder to vote should be exposed, and the people behind it should be held accountable. Our initiative would require that. So let's talk about specific requirements in terms of language, because words matter. Next slide. For the voter ID requirement for in-person, you just have to present a valid driver's license or other government-issued identification card. The state will have ample authority to establish a voter ID. The state of Iowa actually has a separate voter ID. A lot of states that have a voter ID requirement say if you don't have a driver's license, you certainly can get a voter ID card. So if the state would like to establish that, by all means, we would be perfectly happy with that. For voting by mail, we do not get rid of absentee ballots. I believe in absentee ballots. The more the merrier. The convenience of it, great. However, we have to verify an individual's identity. So we would require that the signature match and that the individual provide the last 3 digits of a valid and current driver's license. Now, if the state would like to do what Iowa does and go with a voter ID, they can do that too. But there needs to be some sort of independent 2-step process of having some sort of identification number on an ID that's been issued to the person who matches the ballot, as well as a signature match. Now, there's a reason why, and I know that there are some conspiracy theorists who will say, well, Carl, people can still fraudulently vote. Hold on a second. In order for a fraudulent ballot to be cast, the person would have to get the ballot, number one. Number two, they would have to find the person's driver's license. It's kind of hard to get that and the ballot. And number three, they would have to match that signature. So we believe that this is sufficient internal controls to do the job without making it difficult to vote. Now, any individual who, for some reason, loses their ID card or doesn't have a verification, we'll give them till almost a month after the election, 2 days before certification, which tends to be 4 weeks from the election, to basically submit paperwork, whatever documentation they need to the registrar of voters to make sure that their ballot is counted, which is, by the way, already current law. So we just make sure that the Constitution gives you a right to that. Next slide. We also look at voter list maintenance. We require that each county shall have the duty and the authority. Now, this is important because our California Secretary of State has intentionally prevented county election officials from maintaining accurate voter registration lists. What we are now doing with this initiative is we're saying that, yes, the Secretary of State under federal law has certain rights and responsibilities, but every county shall also have the duty and authority to maintain accurate lists of individuals registered to vote. And shall, not may, shall implement a process to verify that each individual on their list is a qualified elector. This makes it impossible for the Secretary of State to somehow walk in and say, well, I think that we should allow people to vote when they're not eligible, because a county registrar now has state constitutional authority to say, I have a duty to do this job. I have the authority to do the job given to me by the voters. And so if there's a dispute, well, then I will take it to court and get a judge to arbitrate whether this is proper. Now, I don't expect that to happen. I expect this language to basically tell people, do your damn job and do it right. Because right now you have a Democrat elected Secretary of State intentionally not doing her job. And what we want to do is make sure that each county has the authority and the duty to make sure they can do proper voter list maintenance consistent with the standards outlined in the Help America Vote Act and the National Voter Registration Act. It also states in our initiative that if a county obtains information to suggest that a voter no longer resides at an address, and that could be through commercial databases, the National Post Office, NCOA, National Change of Address database, that person will remain on the voter rolls, and we will go through the process for verification of the person's identity. However, no automatic vote by mail ballot will be sent out to that person unless they verify their address in advance or they specifically request a vote by mail ballot. Again, that person will not be removed from the voter list. They will still be able to walk into any polling station at any time and vote, which again is the requirement in federal law, that there's a process that you have to follow for a voter that may be inactive or a voter that may have moved. We are completely grounded in case law and federal law, but we believe that it is a reckless decision to knowingly mail a ballot out to someone in an election when other information exists to suggest that person no longer lives there. Next slide. We will have an evaluation of wait times for polling locations, and those will be remediated if there are any problems. And finally, now this I think is probably the most important element of this initiative, all state and local government officials shall assist with and facilitate compliance with this section, period. Any government official at the state or local level that has information that a registrar of voters needs in order to maintain a proper list, in order to do citizenship reviews and checks, that government official, whether they work for the state or the local government, shall assist with this initiative and meeting the requirements here. Now, if they don't, any citizen can sue. So our good friend Shirley Weber, the Secretary of State, you don't do your job, we're coming into court and suing you to compel you to do your job in compliance with this section and reasonable standards established by case law for voter registration, voter management, voting management throughout the state. Next slide. Those are the requirements. Now, we would also like to do additional election integrity efforts. We can't put our eggs in the basket of just the ballot measure. So we also are asking counties to vote to do an audit the vote ordinance. And that would be to do an independent review of their own voter rolls leading up to the election and to publish that publicly so the voters know whether the registrar of voters is doing the right job or a good job. And if there is inaccuracy, if it's the Secretary of State's fault, then blame the Secretary of State. Let the voters know that you have a political driven Secretary of State not allowing your county to do its job. We also should do a random audit of vote by mail signatures to make sure that signatures were properly reviewed, as well as rejected signatures do not constitute evidence of fraud. And third, there's nothing stopping a county from doing as our initiative would require, and that is measuring the wait times for polling locations and to make sure that they have a continuous improvement regime in place. So we would like to see that happen in every county, irrespective of the constitutional amendment that we're proposing. Next slide. We also are preparing to train individuals with integrity to take jobs in county election offices to review the signatures. We did a pilot project of this in the general election in San Diego and in Orange County, and it really did improve election integrity in those two counties. And we want to make this pilot permanent statewide. So we've dedicated ourselves to recruiting volunteers to take paid jobs in county election offices when those jobs are made available, and to do the jobs with integrity. We also want to look at promoting early voting. And so we have the SAFE method of voting, secure, audit, fix, and examine, as well as safe voting events and ballot harvesting events done right. But we have got to get people to bank the vote early in the process, not wait to the end. Next slide. What has to happen in order for us to qualify the voter ID initiative? Well, first we need volunteers. We need to collect 1 million signatures, and that's going to take a lot of effort. And so I encourage you to go to that website, electionintegrityinitiative.com, and sign up immediately as a volunteer to collect signatures. And I need to know how many signatures you think you can get. So please indicate whether it's 10 signatures, 25, 50, 100. If you're willing to be a regional lead to manage other signature collectors underneath you, but we desperately need to build up our volunteer list. Second, we need funding. The hard costs will be about $3 million. And so if you can contribute at electionintegrityinitiative.com and encourage your friends to do so, that is absolutely vital to getting fuel in the tank to manage the campaign. And third, get all of the elected officials in your area, state and local candidates, Republican Central Committees, all to endorse the voter ID initiative. We've got to make this a team effort, a coalition effort. Now, in order to get 1 million signatures, it really will boil down to not only volunteers, but our ability to collaborate and coordinate with paid signature efforts. There are a number of ballot measures that business coalition groups are filing. August is the period by which people have to start filing initiatives in order to make it on the ballot by November of the following year. And so we believe that the voter ID initiative can qualify with just the $3 million of hard costs and tens of thousands of volunteers, provided that another business initiative is out there that's funded, and then the signature collectors that are paid could actually carry both initiatives at the same time. So there is a thought process here for how we want to do the campaign, what we hope will happen. And we are in discussions with those other parties to see if our initiative can be the anchor store or the featured attraction to get people interested in coming and signing a number of other initiatives at their table. This is not going to be easy to do. The incumbent politicians are going to lie. The media is going to lie. The media does not want voter ID. They're going to say that this is somehow suppressing the vote. Again, I would challenge them. Do your damn job. Your own subscribers know that this is a problem. Your own viewers know that this is a problem. Who are you kidding by saying there's no issue? When you have 1 out of 10 households getting an orphan ballot in the election, a ballot for someone who doesn't live there, you don't think they're saying, wow, we have a problem with voter list maintenance. And so just help us fix the problem. Unless you want to suppress the conservative vote and getting people to think that the fix is in, and I think perhaps you do, And that's the infuriating thing about this, is that you don't want the system to be fixed. You don't want to restore integrity in our democracy because maybe you benefit from the situation messed up as it is. But if you truly want to cover this story with some honesty, if you want to be balanced, if you want to be responsive to the concerns that the PPIC poll surfaces, then at least entertain the question. Does California need a voter ID initiative? I think many people would say absolutely yes. With that, we will invite you to the website, electionintegrityinitiative.com. Next slide. Electionintegrityinitiative.com, where you can sign up to volunteer, share the page with friends, invite people to upcoming town halls, and to contribute. It is our expectation that we will get title and summary back from the California Attorney General sometime in late September, early October. And then we will be able to make an announcement at that time, given title and summary, on our next steps for signature collection by printing petitions and distributing them. With that, I want to invite you to ask questions. If you are on Zoom, you can click raise hand in the software, click raise hand. And when you're called on, please unmute yourself and ask your question. You could also ask questions by typing them into the Q&A and chat box. I'm going to read some questions in that chat box while Dylan gets our video Zoom questions ready. Brenda says, I'm uncomfortable with mailing a copy of my driver's license with my vote. Well, you're not mailing a copy of your driver's license. You're just giving the last 3 digits. And if you have a lot of people who feel that it's somehow your driver's license, the last 3 digits is somehow compromising your identity, well, then our state politicians can certainly do what Iowa did and provide a voter ID. But I'm not seeing that as a concern for most people out there in terms of saying that somehow using a driver's license, the last 3 digits alone, somehow is a concern of theirs. Let's see, there's a question about artificial intelligence. We don't actually address that, so that's okay. What is the max contribution a contributor can provide the initiative? Randy asked that. There are no limits because it's a ballot measure campaign at electionintegrityinitiative.com. I missed the meeting. Where can I watch the replay? This will be on this whole briefing in full will be on the website electionintegrityinitiative.com by the end of today. Please share that website with your friends and family so that they can watch the briefing and be part of the campaign and sign up. How many signatures will be needed? 1 million. But in order to get a million valid signatures, you really need like 1.35 million. We do 100% verification on all of the initiatives that we run. So we actually know how many duplicates we have, how many bad signatures we have. I would venture to guess 1.3 million will be our target, but we could get more, and it's always better to have more. Is volunteering in a voting center on election day useful? I'd rather have you dragging out voters who think like you. Turning out the vote is key. If you want to volunteer in the voting process, get a paid job in the election office with the county. But simply volunteering in the voting center to monitor the process, if you're going to do nothing else, it can help. But in terms of the pecking order, help us turn out the vote, number 1. Get a paid job in the election office to do the job right, number 2. And then number 3, watch from the corner as people are voting. Dylan, let's call on some people from the Zoom software.
Okay, we have Jane Habiger.
Jane Habiger. Jane Habiger, please unmute yourself. There you are. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hello.
Yes, you're on air.
I had moved and actually a couple different houses, and I had gone into the DMV to do paperwork because they don't have you go back into the computer, which will re-register you, right? Well, so I thought that I would be getting ballots to where I eventually moved to.
Right.
which didn't happen. I missed the primary. I was going through a medical crisis also. And then I almost missed the regular vote.
Okay. So your question real quick.
Okay, well, what's going on with that? Because it on there said that it would be changed on the paperwork from the DMV, your registration address.
Okay.
So
So
mine became an orphan
I
ballot, and then I had to
understand
reorder one from where I was
you
living.
okay, let me answer your question. And this is why, again, part of our efforts for election integrity has to be about explaining how people can vote, how to get maximum turnout. And Jane, you could have walked into any polling station in the state of California, frankly, but at least in your county. And you could walk into any of those polling stations on election day at 7:59 in the evening and say, I want a provisional ballot right now. And they would have to give you a provisional ballot, even if you're not registered. You could register right there on the spot. And most voters don't know that voting, there are no real barriers to voting. We have voting on demand in California. Now, when you do that, your identity must still be verified in the weeks after the election for that provisional ballot. And that's not a problem. That's how the system should work. And so I tell people there's no excuse not to vote. Anyone, even someone who's not registered, can vote up to 7:59 p.m. on election night simply by being in a polling station and announcing publicly, I want to vote, I want to register, give me the paperwork. And they must then give you that paperwork and take care of your vote. Now, if you're sick, there's also a process for voting by fax, by scan, by electronic device. And so, again, there's nothing wrong with these programs, provided that the state monitor them and manage them properly. And so we need to help our voters, all voters, vote by any means necessary. But what we're suggesting with this initiative is that there needs to be a verification that we can all be comfortable with, and that's where voter ID comes in. Next question on Zoom, Dylan.
Okay, we have Kathleen Prokop.
Kathleen, please unmute yourself. Kathleen Prokop. Kathleen, unmute yourself. You're still mute. Kathleen, you're still muted. Unmute yourself, Kathleen Prokop. Going once, going twice. All right, we'll come back to Kathleen. Well, there she is. There you are. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I just wondered, since the discussion is about integrity for voter and also, I guess, registration, I just wondered, because maybe the concern is that identity theft or something like that. Well, how about for the first time voter registration, or maybe every 5 years or so, to register to vote or re-register to vote, we do fingerprint aside plus the driver's license or social security card and/or.
Okay.
You think
Well, you know
that
what?
might have solved the problem?
I understand. Thank you, Kathleen, for the question. I think that we can achieve the sort of oversight that we need with the voter ID. You don't need to have a blood sample. You don't need to have a DNA test. Voter ID is the common sense, middle ground, consensus position. And we do not want to make things too complicated for elections. Sam asked a question in the chat box while we get our next Zoom question through Dylan. He says, how will a driver's license number actually increase voter integrity? In other words, what prevents the fraudulent voter from simply making up 3 numbers? Sam, this initiative would require that the state would have the driver's license numbers for each voter. And that is something that they can certainly implement in a matter of weeks, given the type of databases that we have. And so I'm not too worried about them, having the accurate voter driver's license on file. And if the state says somehow they can't accomplish that, then whoever's managing that department should resign. The politicians, the governor should resign, and we need to have a basic replacement, because simply saying you don't want to do your job is not sufficient when it comes to our election. Do the job, get the driver's license information ready. If Iowa can do it, I know Gavin Newsom, who claims he's the best governor on the universe, I'm sure he can probably do it as well. Next
Okay,
question from Zoom.
We have Brenda Ping. Brenda, you should be allowed to unmute yourself.
There you go, Brenda, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I live in a condo complex, and we generally have extra ballots that like they get mailed to somebody, and then they just sit it on a counter and leave
Yep.
it there. What's the
Yep.
best way? Where do I send those, or what do I do with ballots that have been sent to somebody that no longer lives here? What do I do with those?
Yeah. Well, I'll just tell you right now, again, I just have to mock the liberal media in California when they say, oh, there's no problems with the elections. Show up to any condo units or apartment buildings, go talk to any postal clerk, and they know that you're full of crap. Okay. Which is, again, why when I see these stories from the media saying there are no problems, I'm just like, everybody knows that there's a problem, and you've just lost even more of what little credibility you had in the process. But what do good citizens do to try to clean things up? Well, first, don't vote the ballot. And it's astonishing that you have to tell people that. But secondly, unfortunately, the county registrars or voters will tell you that they can't do anything about it, that the Secretary of State tells them they must keep those people on the rolls and they must continue to mail out those ballots. That is a problem. I don't mind if people are maintained on the rolls, provided that you don't do an automatic mailing ballot to them unless they request it or verify their address. But the automatic mailing of ballots or permanent absentee ballot status is the problem. And the Secretary of State knows that. And the Secretary of State knows that she's lying when she says that there are no other options besides doing it that way, that the federal law requires it. That is a provable lie. And it would be nice to see the media ask the question, why are we mailing ballots to people who are on the National Change of Address Registry? Why are we mailing ballots to people automatically who didn't respond to a question about, are you actually still living at this residence? And so if we, the citizens, find these ballots, a lot of people say, well, I'll call the registrar. It's not going to do you any difference. It's not going to do you any good. That's why this initiative is so crucial that we pass. We have time for 2 more questions on the Zoom. I want to let you know that if you have additional questions, you can always email them at info@reformcalifornia.org, info@reformcalifornia.org. Next Zoom question.
Okay, we have Nathan Mayer. Nathan, you should be allowed to unmute yourself.
Nathan Meyer or Mayor, Nathan Meyer, please unmute yourself. There you go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
How you doing? It was good to meet you at one of your fundraiser events a couple of years ago. Anyway, doing some digging after the 2020 elections, I uncovered the user manual for employees at the DMV, instructing them how to process voter registration. To my shock, it just simply directs them to inquire if the person wishes to register to vote. If so, it just simply ports the information over. There's no requirement for them to double check whether or not you should be able to register to vote. In fact, if you say you're not sure if you're able to, then they automatically mail you something which you can simply reply, yes, I want to register, and then you're registered. So that's a loophole that needs to be fixed, which is pretty much what we suspected, that once you get your driver's license or do anything at the DMV, you're basically registered to vote, whether
Yep.
you should be allowed to or not.
And that is a state policy implemented by the state supermajority political party that benefits from that policy. And our initiative would hold local and state officials accountable for complying with our initiative, subject to a lawsuit, subject to a court order. And so that sort of loophole would not be permitted under our initiative. We do not allow someone to just simply say, oh, best efforts. Nope. You have the duty and authority to make sure that your voter registration list is accurate and that people who are eligible electors are the only ones on that list. This is a game changer in terms of voter identity as well as eligibility review. Next question. Last question.
Okay.
From
We
the
have
Zoom.
Victor Mazinski. Apologies if I'm
Victor
mispronouncing that, Victor.
Yeah, Victor Mazinski, please unmute yourself. You're still muted. Victor, there you are. Go ahead and ask your question. Victor, are you there? Victor, we cannot hear you. All right, we will come back to Victor. Submit your question to info@reformcalifornia.org.
We just had him and I just muted him. So
Okay.
Victor, if you unmute yourself one more time, try it again.
I'm sorry,
go.
can you hear me now?
Now we
Yes.
can
Okay.
hear you. Thanks.
Carl, my question may have been answered by you, but I'm saying if we have a verifiable voters fraud here and there and almost everywhere, can we as United citizens sue the state and register of voters to also apply some pressure and make some changes?
Well, our initiative allows any citizen standing to sue a county or the state for not complying with the initiative. And again, anyone can sue, all right, but they're going to need to show what their concern is, how they believe that things are deficient. And just on the basis of the Transparency Foundation report, there are 5 or 6 lawsuits that could be filed just on the basis of the evidence that they've collected with this initiative passing. So I'm pretty confident that this gives us a reasonable framework, a balanced framework, consensus reforms that will allow us to get the job done. We have to be balanced because we can't overly restrict the system. We want to make voting easy. We want to keep voting easy, but we want only eligible voters whose identity is verified to be able to cast votes. That is the perfect mix that we're going for here. And we believe that this language has done that. And I'm sure that we're going to get a title and summary from the Attorney General and coverage from the media saying that this is going to somehow be voter suppression. These people are liars, cheats, and thieves. These are the same people who write ballot measure titles that are completely dishonest. We can't control their unethical, illegal, dishonest tactics. But if we all work together, I do believe that we can prevail in this fight. We must prevail in this fight. So please go to the website, electionintegrityinitiative.com, join the fight. We will keep you updated on milestones and status. The next that you'll hear from us is when we get the title and summary back from the Attorney General, which, as I mentioned, should be at the end of September. Thank you very much for joining us today, and continue to stay and fight in the state of California to take back this wonderful state. Thanks for watching. Help us break through the censorship of the liberal media by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel.